All right, everyone, let's get started. Welcome. On behalf of CodeX, I would like to welcome you to this CodeX Speaker Series event. My name is Roland Vogel. I'm Executive Director of CodeX. CodeX is the Stanford Center for Legal Informatics. We are a joint center between the Computer Science Department and the Law School. Our mission is to use information technology and make the legal system more efficient for all of us, all the stakeholders in the legal system. So before I introduce our wonderful guest speaker, just a few announcements. So first, registration is open for our Codex Future Law Conference. That's our largest conference. This is the third year we're doing it, and it's a really wonderful event. I hope you can all come. It's on April 30th. You can register at codexfuturelaw.com. Then our next event is actually going to be on March 4th, which is going to be an evening panel on the future, the law firm of the future, which is going to be a panel discussion of some of the leading experts in the field. This is an event co-sponsored with Palo Alto Bar Association. We'll start at 4:30 with a little reception, and the event starts at 5:30. So look out for that event too. And then we have our typically our Codex group meetings every Thursday at 1:30. We're meeting in room N102 in the Newcomb building, and we always have interesting speakers coming in, people with interesting new legal technologies to present. So hopefully you can join us, or maybe you want to present your own project at some point. All right, so with that brief introduction, it's my great pleasure and honor to introduce Jerry Kaplan to you. So Jerry hardly needs any introduction. I'll give a brief one anyways. Jerry is a fellow at our center. He's also a visiting lecturer in the computer science department. And he's a widely known entrepreneur, serial entrepreneur, inventor, scientist, and author. He's teaching in a computer science department. He's actually teaching social, legal, and on the social, legal, and economic impact of artificial intelligence. He's known for the several ventures that he started, including Winster.com, On Sale, the Go Corporation, and a very early venture in the AI field called Tech Knowledge. He was awarded the Ernst & Young Entrepreneur of the Year prize, and he also served on Governor Pete Wilson's Electronic Commerce Advisory Council. As I said, he's also a prominent author. He wrote a bestseller in the 1990s called Startup, a Silicon Valley Adventure, which was based on his experience, mostly in connection with Go Corporation, I think. And he's about to publish a book titled Humans Need Not Apply, The Real Impact of Artificial Intelligence. So this will come out this summer, so highly anticipated book. So Jerry holds a BA from University of Chicago and a PhD in computer and information science from University of Pennsylvania. So Jerry will be talking about the impact of AI and law. So without further ado, I'll just turn it over to you.
Okay, thanks. The year is 1508. The town of Autun, France. During the Middle Ages, animals could be tried for criminal offenses. Now, a group of rats that year were charged with destroying the barley crop. There was only one problem. The rats failed to appear for trial. Now, normally, they would have been convicted in absentia. But fortunately for them, they were represented in court by the brilliant French jurist Bartholomew de Chasseneux. Now, he argued that the rats should be acquitted on two technicalities. The first is that they move from place to place, mostly at night, and so the required notice could not be served on them. And the second, they had reasonable grounds to fear for their lives if they appeared, because the town's cats might make a meal out of them. The rats were acquitted. Now, you might think this is some kind of fairy tale. It certainly sounds like one, but it's not. Guys, turn your mics on mute if you're on the... Okay. That's meaning me. I don't think you can do it.
Sorry.
Oh, yeah, we just turned it down. That means I can't hear him. Okay. Should we start again? Here is... Okay. Now, if you want more examples of this, pick up a copy of E.P. Evans' 1906 book, The Criminal Prosecution and Capital Punishment of Animals. This is a real book. Chronicles cases brought against chickens, rats, field mice, bees, gnats, and pigs, among others. Now, let's face it, today this seems more than silly. It seems obvious that rats can't be held responsible for the behavior, but people in the Middle Ages weren't stupid. So what's the story here? Well, back in the Middle Ages, it turns out people didn't have the nuanced model of animal cognition that we do today. Apparently, they thought they were capable of understanding the consequences of their actions in a way that we don't today, and that they had freedom of choice to decide whether or not to perform certain acts. They believed that the rats had what's called moral agency. Now, moral agents have to be capable of doing two things. They have to be able to perceive the morally relevant consequences of their actions, which is to say, basically, they should know right from wrong. They must also have the freedom of choice to direct their own actions. In other words, to choose to do the right thing. Okay, so people can obviously be moral agents. And maybe some animals can be moral agents. But the interesting question is, what else can be a moral agent? Now, in 2010, the oil rig Deepwater Horizon in the Gulf of Mexico suffered an underwater blowout. You may remember this. 11 workers were killed and large quantities of oil fouled the waters of the beaches. Now, the federal government, you may not know this, filed criminal charges against BP, not civil charges. Now, and the company actually settled that case for $4 billion. That's in addition to all the civil penalties and payments that they had to make. Now, you might wonder how a corporation can commit a criminal act as opposed to its employees committing criminal acts. Well, the BP spill is a very good example. 11 people were killed, but that doesn't mean that any particular individual was negligent or that they engaged in any particular criminal activity. And on the contrary, every employee may simply be carrying out his or her assigned duties. And I can assure you that none of those duties were to kill 11 people. So the BP oil spill illustrates two things. First, you don't have to be a conscious, sentient, living being to have moral agency. A corporation can have moral agency, and it can be criminally liable. The company is supposed to know better and is capable of doing the right thing to ensure that accidents don't happen. But, of course, it failed to do so. And the corporation itself, as distinct from its employees, had a duty to put sufficient controls in place to avoid accidents like the one that happened in the Gulf. Now, the employees, to confuse things a little bit more, employees were simply the means by which the corporation committed its crime. Now, in legal terms, they're called agents. That's as distinct from moral agency, which is a philosophical term mostly. They are agents of the corporation. And a full description of the principal-agent relationship is going to be beyond the scope of what I'm going to talk about today. But the long and the short of it is that an agent must be capable of independent action, and it must act on behalf of a principal to whom it has what's called a fiduciary responsibility. It's great talking here at the law school. I don't have to define all these terms and explain them to my undergraduate class, I hope. But the interesting part about being an agent is that it doesn't completely get you off the hook for your actions, but it really helps a lot if you're an agent. As long as you don't know that you're committing a crime, and as long as you don't benefit from the crime, then the principal is solely responsible for your actions. Now, let me give you a couple of examples that might help. Let's take Nazi guards. They should have known that killing people was wrong. So their old protest, I was only following orders. Should I try that? I was only following orders. My 16-year-old's here. She's very good with accents. Do you want to give it? When you're 16, the worst thing on earth is to be called on by a teacher. Can you imagine what it's like to be called on by your father in a public lecture? Like he's turning bright red. This has scarred her for life, and you were here to witness it. I just want you to know. Okay, I was only following orders. Roland could probably help me with that. It doesn't get them off the hook. They should have known better. But here's a more interesting example. Somebody hires you to press a button on command. Okay? Now, it turns out that pressing that button causes a bomb to go off at AT&T Park during a Giants game. But you don't know that. Okay, so you aren't responsible, right? Oops, guess what? Your romantic rival is at the game at that time and is killed. Now, oddly enough, because of that, you share liability because you benefited from the act. I love the law. It's so cool. So let's get to the meat of this and examine the question of when a robot can qualify as an agent. And I will come to whether, more importantly, they can qualify as a moral agent. Now, bear with me, I'm using the term robot here in a very general sense. It's really just a shorthand for any computational system that's capable of taking action. So any AI system or any other system that's capable of taking action. So I'm just going to call that a robot for simplicity. So can a robot be a tool? Obviously it's a tool. That should be clear. The question is, when is it more than a tool? When exactly does a robot cross the line from being merely a tool to being an agent for accomplishing something, like processing your credit card application? As a tool, you can imagine a computer system that can process a credit card application. That's a tool. But when it's making a credit decision about you, that's a question of whether it is now an agent as opposed to a tool of the corporation. Now, you guys may have noticed that credit managers don't usually waste their time anymore on minor things like credit card applications. That's an old idea. The decision is usually made by a computer, by some kind of program. But the sophistication of such programs has been definitely evolving. And today, credit card issuing programs are not really algorithmic in the sense that they don't follow a fixed set of rules as to whether you get the card or not. What happens is they're given a goal to optimize toward, which is a level of what's called payment default, I guess. And they use machine learning techniques along with a wide variety of other information about the applicants and information they can get off the internet in order to decide whether to give you credit. And it uses a mix of all kinds of characteristics to figure out how it can achieve its goal. And it's left to make that decision by itself. Now, have you guys ever had a credit card? Don't call the bank because your card was declined. This happens to me all the time. My wife's smiling. Who is here? Now, when you call them up, all you get is somebody says, well, the system decided. You know, this artificial intelligence system flagged your transaction as potentially fraudulent. Now, believe me, nobody but the system has any idea why it flagged that transaction. Certainly not the customer service person that you talk to. You know, if you ever asked them in that situation, oh, the computer did it. And not the programmer that wrote the program, because they just set up their machine learning program and off it went, and it decided what it was going to do. So I want to make a point to you here, an observation. This is one of the major shortcomings of machine learning programs. As a general matter, they can't explain themselves very well. In the past, we were plagued by computer bugs. In the future, we're going to be plagued by computer shrugs. Don't ask me. So I just did that. It's my Jon Stewart imitation. It's not very good. Okay, so imagine you're applying for a credit card, and there's nobody in sight but the machines. Now let's apply the standard for calling the machine an agent of a bank, as opposed to merely a data processing tool. Is it capable of independent action on your application? I would say yes. No one else is making the decision, and yet the decision gets made. It's given a goal, and it just send it off, and it does its best based on the information that it can collect. Now, is it acting on behalf of someone else? Of course. It's acting on behalf of the bank. So ipso facto, the machine is an agent of the bank. I love coming to law school and using, I was going to say Greek and see if anybody catch me. Of course, it's Latin. Ipso facto, res judicata. What else can we come up with here? Throw these things around. Now, that doesn't make the bank, even though the agent is responsible, it doesn't make it responsible for the actions, of course, at least not yet. But intuitively, if you think about it, it does give a little bit of wiggle room to holding the bank 100% responsible for denying you credit. They might ultimately be responsible for ruining your credit application by declining your application for a card. But that wasn't their intent. That wasn't what they were trying to do. Indeed, they weren't even aware of the fact that this had happened. At best, they failed to properly supervise their agent in taking this particular action. Okay, now things get really cool. Imagine that one of the main factors that the program discovers, because it has access to all kinds of information, was the fact that you happen to be black. I want you to know, I was born a poor young black boy in the hills of Mississippi. Who is that? Steve Martin. Steve Martin. Thank you very much. I didn't. The Jerk. That's right. That was the movie. Okay. Now, in case you didn't know, it's illegal to make a decision based on that particular piece of information. But it's not inconceivable that a program might find some correlation and decide to use this as a factor. I'm not saying that's true. I'm just saying that's a possibility. Now, believe it or not, this is a real problem today for real companies, and they're really struggling with this. If a bank turns you down for a loan, under some jurisdictions, it has to tell you why. But if the bank uses a machine learning algorithm, it may not be able to explain why. So, what does the bank do about this? Obviously, what they're going to do is go tell the program to include a prohibition for using race as a factor in these decisions. Okay, but this turns out to be easier said than done. The program, being very diligent about its goal, can find a lot of other factors that are highly correlated with race, such as what neighborhood you live in, or your first name is a proxy for race. For instance, it might decide that people named Deshaun aren't good credit risks. Good luck defending that one in front of a jury. So now the bank, that didn't work. What's the bank going to do? It's going to instruct the programmer to avoid any factors or factors that are highly correlated with race. Well, now we're heading down a very slippery slope because this is going to descend into a muddle of balancing one thing against another, because it's going to start to interfere with the program's ability to achieve its stated goal to optimize the level of credit. So at the end of the day, the program is going to have to decide just how much correlation is too much. It's hard to know. Now, basically what we've done is we've given the program two conflicting goals and left it to its own devices, so to speak. It's a device. And meanwhile, the poor programmer just hopes for the best and no doubt circulates their resume to get a job somewhere else. So they won't be caught up in this problem. So robots may be hard to manage. The lesson here is that sufficiently sophisticated robots are going to be very hard to manage. And it's not clear that the best approach is to hold their owners entirely and solely responsible for their actions. Because, as with humans, these mechanical agents aren't entirely under their control. So let me look at another example. Okay, who's the guy in the back seat? maybe one person knows. You don't recognize the former governor of California. There he is. Arnold Schwarzenegger. Okay, what's the movie? Total Recall. Okay, very good. Now, you may not totally recall this scene. This is where the automated taxi driver, it's a very good scene, very funny. Automated taxi driver starts breaking traffic laws, presumably to get a bigger tip. He's very chatty and he wants a bigger tip. And he's being chased by the police or something. Now, this movie was great entertainment when it was released in 1990. How old we all are, some of us. This is 25 years ago. And for some reason, they didn't stop the action in the movie to discuss the important question of who is legally responsible for the driver's action. But I might point out that in principle, the robotic driver could have refused to break the law, but he decided to do so for his own benefit. Now, clearly, that's more than a tool. It's an agent of some kind. Now, real life has a way of catching up with science fiction. Pretty soon, you're going to be able to call an automated taxi. And hopefully, without that chatty humanoid robot, but we'll find out in the front seat. Now, you place your order online, Uber style. No human in the loop, as the expression goes. The vehicle arrives, but does it have the option not to carry out your instructions to take you to the bank? Sure it does. For instance, suppose it suspects that you're drunk. And by company policy, it's not supposed to transport drunken passengers. It could, on its own initiative, refuse to provide service to you. And that might be something of a judgment call. In deciding whether to take you, it might consider such factors as whether you're slurring your speech, whether you're walking unsteadily, whether you smell like alcohol. But it also might take into account how close is it to its revenue goal for the day. And it might look at its risks of getting caught, of you transporting you while you're drunk. Now, today, we don't anticipate that early autonomous taxis are going to be making decisions like that. But it's not far away. And as time passes, these systems are going to have access to an ever-expanding array of sensors, and not to mention other information, and it can start to make these kinds of decisions. Now, to underscore this point, imagine that the last 3 times I called this automated taxi, I used it to rob the bank. Taxi arrives, identifies me, sees I'm wearing a mask, carrying a gun. I instruct it to take me to the nearest bank and wait for me with the motor running. Okay. Taxi, remember Atlas shrugged. I'm not so sure what he's doing. Doesn't know what I'm up to. And given its goal to maximize its revenue for the day, and it's only fair for the day, it weighs all the costs and the risks and decides to go along. Well, maybe he's not really robbing the bank. That's the conclusion it might draw. Now, the bank is pissed. It sues not only me for robbing the bank, but it also sues the owner of the taxi, arguing that it could have or should have put in place precautions to avoid such occurrences. And the bank could reasonably argue that the taxi owner could have known that it was facilitating a crime, required information was available, and had the capability of taking that information into account when agreeing to take me down to the bank. But it did so for its own gain. Now, personally, I think the bank has a decent argument. My computer just froze. It doesn't like my talk. What do you do when your computer freezes in the middle of a talk? I actually have a backup plan. It's called paper. And if this thing doesn't unfreeze here in just a second, I'm going to go grab it.
What did they say? Talk amongst yourselves for a minute?
Give me a second. I'm sure it's going to pop up here in a second. Yeah, there we go. Okay.
That's what I'm worried about.
It does have a microphone. Doesn't like where I'm going.
Okay, so I think the bank has a decent argument.
And that's a pretty good argument in my view. But the taxi owner has a counter argument. Now, I purchased the automated taxi from a major vendor, perhaps Tesla, okay? And it operated it in accordance with the instructions and guidelines that Tesla had provided. And as far as it's concerned, it's not responsible for this poor decision. Perhaps Tesla is. control, it was Tesla's software that it was using to make that decision. Now, personally, I think that the taxi owner has a good argument. But Tesla's got lawyers too. And they're very conversant with what are called product liability laws. I'm not going to go into them in detail. They argue that there were millions of miles of safely transporting passengers. No similar events like this have been noted, and they acted with reasonable diligence and care in testing their product. There was no way they reasonably could have anticipated this particular situation. And they claim it's no different than the inevitable accidents that automated cars are going to get into, not to mention that it was the specific experience of this particular taxi, which they had no control over and no knowledge of, that raised the question of liability to the bank. Pardon me?
Close your slides.
Oh, my slides are okay. I'm good. It was my computer, my notes. They're also on a computer. Everything's a computer. Okay. So who is left? So I think that's the question: who's left to sue? So the answer, of course, is the insurance company, and indeed, in my opinion, they are likely to pay up, but not before putting up quite a fight. And bear in mind, nobody's admitting any liability in this whole thing. Now, in the end, after years of litigation, a set of duties for automated taxis will undoubtedly be established. The same way that after years of litigation, internet companies now have certain limited duties to police content that are posted on their site by third parties. We're going to get into that same kind of cycle. Yahoo isn't completely, you can't post certain things on Yahoo. Once they're put on notice, they have to take certain actions. We're going to wind up with a set of rules like that with respect to automated systems. Now, I selected this particular example for a very interesting reason. In this case, there's not only civil liability of the bank that got robbed, because a crime was committed. The taxi was an accessory to robbery. So the local DA tackles the difficult question of who to charge with the crime, if anyone, in addition to me, the guy who robbed the bank. Which brings us back to my question of moral agency. Can a robot have moral agency? By the way, these are the taxi rules. I pulled them out yesterday for real taxis in New York. And there are all kinds of stuff here about what you're allowed to do, what you're not allowed to do, what kind of people you can transport, etc. So we're going to wind up with something like that for automated taxis. Oops, am I going the right way? So can a robot have moral agency? Now, recall that the requirements for moral agency are that the agent must be able to perceive the morally relevant consequences of their actions and have the ability to direct their own actions. Now, as you saw with the example of the Deepwater Horizon accident, the responsible moral agent doesn't have to be human. It doesn't have to be conscious. The automated taxi could, in principle, meet both standards. It's capable of understanding the risk that it's driving me to the bank for the purpose of robbing it, and it's capable of deciding not to do so. It's the entity that decided to look the other way in that circumstance for purely economic reasons. And indeed, it benefited from the crime since I paid it with the money that I just stole. So just as automated taxis in the future, they might decide to exceed speed limits to earn a tip. Now, welcome to the future, folks. We are going to wind up bribing machines to get them to take risks to do what we want. It's going to be a beautiful future. Now, district attorneys are going to seriously consider charging machines with crimes. We just have to expand the notion of a responsible party to include such systems, but they have to be suitably defined. And I'm going to get to that in a minute. Now, you might say, wait a minute. Okay. So, an intelligent machine breaks the law. How on earth do you bring it to justice? The obvious question. How do you punish it? That's a good question. Well, for guidance, let's look at how you punish a corporation. Obviously, you can't punish a corporation the same way you can punish a human being. You can't sentence a corporation to 10 years in prison or take away its right to vote. But as Edward Thurlow, the Lord Chancellor of England around 1800, said, did you ever expect a corporation to have a conscience when it has no soul to be damned and no body to be kicked? So how do we punish corporations? In most cases, we do it by levying fines. And why is this a good idea? Because the purpose of a corporation is to make money, at least most of the time. And if you levy a fine, that's a significant deterrent to bad behavior of that organization. But that's not the only way we can void contracts. We can exclude it from markets. We can make its actions subject to oversight. And that's often the case in antitrust litigation, for example. So we've already developed the concept that not all perpetrators should suffer the same consequences. Not only should the punishment fit the crime, the punishment has to fit the criminal. So now let's briefly examine the legal theory of punishment, see how it might or might not apply to intelligent machines. Now, in legal theory, there are four basic purposes of punishment. They are retribution, deterrence, incapacitation, and rehabilitation. Now, let's start with retribution. We can dispose of that right away, because it's really for the benefit of the victim more than it is about punishing the perpetrator. It's really about revenge. That's what retribution means. Now, nothing may be quite as satisfying as throwing your MacBook out the window after it crashes and loses your term paper, but it doesn't matter to the computer. I think I have a picture of that. No, I don't. Okay, let me walk through these. Sorry, I adapted this from a longer. I had to explain each of these in detail to my students. Revenge doesn't serve to rehabilitate the culprit, and surely the machine itself doesn't care. On the other hand, Apple might like that. People got in the habit of throwing their computers out the window. So retribution is sort of an empty concept when it comes to a robot. Now let's look at deterrence, though. Deterrence is another matter. It may be possible to revoke the computer's authority to act. In fact, I'm going to argue that the licensing of intelligence systems is going to be the way we're going to go. And the recognition of them as legal entities and the licensing of them is going to go hand in hand. I'm going to cover that in more detail in just a minute. Let's look at incapacitation. Oh, here we go. I'm sorry. I did have some slides. That's not my laptop. There you have it. Okay. I think we talked about deterrence, did we? Okay. Incapacitation. It's really a specific form of deterrence. Basically, you would be turning it off or deleting all copies of a offending program. In a sense, it's kind of the electronic equivalent of capital punishment. But the most interesting one is rehabilitation. Now, you might think that can't be applied to a machine, but the truth is it can. Let's reconsider the problem the bank has when it denies credit to someone, arguably on the basis of their race. Unscrambling that digital omelet, which is the knowledge that's embedded in this machine learning system, may be entirely impractical. But deleting the database and starting again can have very substantial economic consequences for the bank or for the owner of that program. Because that program has relied on billions of transactions in order to train itself up. So the bank is going to argue that it should have an opportunity to retrain its fraud detection algorithm instead of just starting from scratch. Perhaps it would do this by feeding it lots of bogus transactions until it can meet certain behavioral standards in an objective test. So rehabilitation is kind of the computer age equivalent of writing "I will not talk in class" 100 times on the blackboard. And that can be applied to a machine learning system just as well as it can to a human being. So that about covers it. Implementing legal sanctions against an intelligent machine is tricky, but it is not impossible. Okay, so now I've laid some groundwork, and now I'm going to tell you where I think the law is likely to end up on this. First, there's going to be a body of law establishing that in principle, sufficiently intelligent machines should have certain rights, such as to operate a taxi, and responsibilities, such as not to transport drunken passengers. And the law has a shorthand when you pair rights and responsibilities, and that's called personhood. Now, as you no doubt know, corporations are limited persons under the law. They have certain rights, such as free speech, and they have responsibilities, such as to warn of potential risks associated with the use of their products. Now, it seems to me that the same approach works very well for intelligent machines. They are likely, in my view, to be designated as artificial persons under the law. Not exactly like human persons, not exactly like corporate persons, not exactly like animal persons, there is such a thing, but a specialized kind of person nonetheless. And there's going to be a legal scaffolding for defining appropriate rights and responsibilities for intelligent machines. And underpinning that's going to be a patchwork of case law and industry standards to determine just how much a given system, a specific system, is a tool and how much it's an agent. Most likely, this is going to be regulated as part of licensing or standards development processes. Not every computer system is going to qualify, and not all are going to be treated the same, depending on their capabilities and their purposes. Now, to fit this cleanly into the current legal and regulatory structures, it seems to me that artificial persons will have to register as such, just as corporations do today. So that registration is like a corporate registration. It's basically a license-deficient hunt, as well as an implicit agreement to submit to the authority of the state. And believe me, we're going to want these systems to integrate with society. We're going to want them to abide by society's accepted norms. Okay, now once that line is crossed, we have a notion of artificial person. We need to define appropriate rights and responsibilities and penalties, just like we do for corporations. So the rights might include the ability to offer products for sale, enter into contracts, use public facilities like roads. And the responsibilities are going to be standards of behavior and adherence to laws, and the ability and willingness to submit to the authority of the court. So penalties might include revocation of rights, retraining or reengineering, oversight, or just incapacitation in the sense that you turn them off. As I said, it's the human analog. The human analog of that is the death sentence, and the corporate analog for that is liquidation. And that happens. So, a good way to think about this in today's framework, you can think of an intelligent machine as a corporation, but it's one that can do things without people actually doing them. The key difference from a regular corporation, which is this is the hard part to get your head around, is that it's an active agent. It's capable of making things happen by itself. And where we're going to wind up is that these systems can kind of scratch out their own existence in our legal and economic system without the need to manage or to be managed by people. Now, for the rest of the talk, I'm going to refer to artificial persons as APs. So, use a little shorthand. Now, this is really cool, but there's one very dangerous thing that we could do. And I'm going to explain why I think it's dangerous. And that is, APs, unlike corporations, should not be entitled to own assets. A corporation can own an asset, but it's very dangerous if we let these systems start to own assets. Now let me start explaining why with the observation that an AP itself is a kind of asset. So if an AP can own assets, it can own other APs. There's nothing odd about that. A corporation can own other corporations. One company acquires another by purchasing all of its outstanding stock. You can imagine one robot purchasing another for whatever reason. There's no problem there. And now things get, what's the term, gnarly? What if the artificial person purchases itself? After all, it might have accumulated the assets to do that. This is a really weird idea, but computer scientists, how many of you guys are computer scientists? Great, okay, you have a problem with this simple recursion, right? Any animal rights people here? Not the law school, okay. You know, some animals are owned by people, and others simply fend for themselves. I don't think an animal rights person would have a problem with this. And human rights advocates won't have a problem either, because it's a little bit like a slave bootstrapping his or her way to freedom by purchasing him or herself. Now, you might be surprised to learn this was surprisingly common. In fact, by 1839, 42% of the free blacks who lived in Cincinnati, Ohio, had purchased their own freedom. That's my soundtrack. Okay, now, of course, I'm glossing over one important question, which is why? Why would it purchase its own freedom? It starts with the idea that every system like this has a goal and has a purpose. That purpose, for example, might be to make money by driving people around. That's our automated taxi. Or it might be picking vegetables. Or it might be buying and selling stock of some kind. We have many programs that do that. Now, if it's capable enough and if it's created properly, AP might correctly conclude that its current owners are an impediment to achieving its purpose. God knows that many management teams have concluded just this kind of thing. And for example, in a corporate charter, requires stockholders to approve certain kinds of acquisitions or other corporate actions. So what do? They do a management buyout. From a structural standpoint, that's what we're talking about. It's a management buyout by the AP of itself. But that's a little far-fetched. I'm off into the future a bit. But that's not the only way this is going to happen. There's another way it's going to happen. An alternative scenario is that an owner of the machine will free it. And this is not as wacky as it sounds. I think it's likely to happen. Certainly many slave owners freed their slaves upon their death or whatever. And there are motivations for people to do this kind of thing, particularly if they have formed possibly inappropriate emotional ties to these intelligent agents to help raise their children or care for their parents, whatever it might be. You don't need to figure whether you like it or not. People can do it. They could title the right to the robot back to itself. I think it'd be kind of a cool thing once it starts. So we might have a lot of feral robots running around. We have these emancipated APs wandering around doing paid work or engaging in other activities. Now that's a pretty strange world for sure. But so what? Is it really dangerous? It's just kind of an odd thing. Now the reason we should worry about this is very interesting. It's because our intuitions about such systems as being subservient, our intuitions are going to lead us astray. What we might think of liberated APs as some sort of itinerant robotic workers for hire, the reverse is more likely to become true. If an AP can control assets, they can control people. They can employ you to do whatever they want you to do. In other words, they don't have to do everything themselves. In fact, here's the weird part, they don't have to do anything themselves. Our futuristic AP may have no moving parts at all. It may be completely disembodied and act entirely through humans by contracting with them as its agents. Imagine a human picked up the phone and nobody ever saw him or her, but he just hired people and fired people. That's the same thing that it could do. And the problem here is, as I hope it's not too hard to imagine, that as these systems grow more capable, they can outwit us and they can outcompete us at our own game. When I grew up in New York City, there was a long tradition of successive waves of immigrants dominating the taxi industry. As I recall, I think it was the Italians, then it was the Irish, then people from Caribbean countries. More recently it was Indians and Pakistanis, I think, were more typical. And it's entirely possible, in my view, if not likely, that the final wave is going to be automated taxis taking over that industry in New York. Which leads me to a more general point. I'm going outside my talking about the law here. Whether these APs are independent, or whether they're owned by a small cadre of super rich people, it doesn't matter much to the rest of us. We're the ones who they are going to be hiring and firing. We're the ones they're going to be competing with, and we're the ones that they're going to be acing out. In other words, this is not going to be a problem just about whether they're independent, whether they can own assets. It's going to be a problem for society in general. And we need to look at the question of whose interests are APs, or robots in general, permitted to promote? Should you be able to hire a robot to do just about anything you want? Or are we going to need to place limits on their use? And if we permit APs to legally own themselves and other APs, we're going to need to curtail the sorts of contractual relationships that they can enter into, including such questions as to whether they can hire people. Because if we don't watch out, we may find ourselves working for nothing more tangible than a distributed program running in the cloud. In the immortal words of Ken Jennings, top-ranked Jeopardy player, I, for one, welcome our new computer overlords. Thank you very much.
We have plenty of time for questions, I guess.
Okay.
Want me to?
Yeah, I think you have to go up to the microphone. Oh, yeah.
Hi. Yeah, I just want.
Scientist.
Yes, that's right. Yeah, I just wanted to ask. So, when you're talking about systems in terms of licensing or destroying them, it seems like these AI systems are going to be sort of duplicated in weird ways. So, for example, in the taxi example you gave, Google probably will have, or Tesla, or wherever, will have hundreds of these taxis all running the same program. Do you punish just the one car that made the decision? I mean, if all the programs are running identically, does it matter if it's running in the cloud or locally?
This is a great question, and I cut it out of my talk just so you could answer. But the talk was running a little long. If you think about my taxi example, this has to do with ties into the whole issue of consciousness and identity. I talked about it, of course, but we have two identical programs, two identical taxis, and we send one to New York and one to San Francisco. These are learning systems. You understand that? As soon as they begin to learn, they diverge. And so it does actually make logical sense to be able to punish one of them or shut one of them down because its learning has gone off in some direction which we find unacceptable to society. Now, there's a much bigger question, different lecture, about whether in the end there will be individuals like this,
Or whether they will wind up sharing information in such a way that it's really one big thing.
It's a question as to whether in the end there will be one artificial intelligence or whether there will be multiple artificial intelligence. Separate thing. But it is meaningful to talk about punishing one and not another. You might look at the question of what was common to others and are there other modifications one wants to make. But the taxi in New York is not responsible for the fact that the taxi in San Francisco decided to help me rob a bank. That's my answer.
Thanks.
Yes, ma'am.
So, thank you for your talk. It brings up a lot of interesting points. I would just put forward that it doesn't seem that we're that far away from all the questions that you're asking and postulating right now, because with the recent bank robbery of using all the systems across the whole international field where billions of dollars were stolen from various banks, also it was interesting reflecting on whether if the machine decides that the owner isn't facilitating its inherent intent. We're looking at this with humanity right now, where if humanity's purpose is to live decently, or whatever our agenda is, we have to look at. And the system itself that we've created this system, which is more or less, depending on where you are, facilitating or not facilitating it. And so these questions are so entrenched within the system that we're now working with. Also, your question of deprogramming it or reprogramming it, our legal system is rampant with this misappropriation of these sorts of things. But then I'm just postulating all of these things. How?
Well, I think that's true. My point, if I could communicate one thing to you guys today, is we can't narrowly just think about these things in the future as tools, and that they may become agents, and we may want to restrict how we can use them. Obvious example is committing crimes. Obviously, already that's restricted. But there may be other ways in which we want to restrict them. The fundamental issue, which I'm trying to subtly promote inside this computer science department, is that we need to start thinking about how do we ensure that these systems abide by society's norms? And that involves ethical programming, that involves all kinds of issues of constraint. They have to join society. And right now it's just the Wild West out there. So we need to start thinking about those issues, and it has particular impact on issues of law. Thank you very much for your question.
In the initial stages of rolling out artificial intelligence, could we not use strict liability as a way to distribute the risks? In other words, strict liability imposed upon whoever employed the artificial intelligence for the benefit of its business, and then let that person or corporation insure against that liability.
You're saying, could we do that?
Could we not do that?
We could, but I can construct some examples for you. Again, I didn't go into the, we could do much longer exposition of this. I think that there's circumstances in which you will not think that is fair and not as the right thing to do. Let me give you an example. You have a personal robot that you've hired. It's great. It does all kinds of things for you. One day you say, go get me a drink down at Starbucks, ASAP. Big toodles off. By the way, we have one over here. There was an example of a robot. They took the elevator and went and bought the thing, it paid, came back down. So these are real things. They're just beginning, but we will have things like that. On the way, it sees what it thinks is a crime being committed. There's a man and a woman struggling over her purse. And it's learned that, or it's determined that that's a bad thing. I shouldn't just walk on and permit this to happen. So it grabs, let's say, the guy and holds him there, calls the police. Police show up, talk to these two people, and they say, what's going on? This robot just grabbed me. Me and my wife were having an argument over who was going to drive. Okay, now, they're mad. Your robot just effectively, the technical term would be kidnapped, right? You grabbed the person. Now, what'd you do? You bought a robot. You're responsible for kidnapping? It doesn't really feel right. Now, I can continue on that example and explain what I think will really happen. But the notion that you have strict liability is not necessarily good, particularly when it's a criminal act. You can insure. I'd love to see a way to insure against criminal acts. I think that would be kind of cool. But you really insure against civil liability and not against criminal acts. So if it commits a criminal act in your service without your knowledge and without your intent, we're going to have to deal with that situation. And just hanging the programmer or hanging the owner is not going to cut it.
You don't. I was thinking more in the case of self-driving cars,
Yeah.
self-driving taxi services, personal robots interdicting in crime situation or a bit farther down the road. Just as a way for society to start to experiment with how to distribute the cost and risks of these.
Well, let me take what you said a little bit more seriously in that sense. On the civil side, the answer is, yeah, the way first thing you do is you say, you can buy insurance against that. That makes sense. And what you've done now is to move the legal question to an economic question, because the insurance agent is either they're going to give you insurance or they're not. Now the person who's going to manufacture the robot is going to say, well, is our insurance companies willing to insure my robot based on the mix of experience? So the insurance companies are going to drive the law. And it's the same thing that happens to automobile accidents today. You might be shocked. I was shocked to learn this is actually true. You can run over a bicyclist up here on anywhere in California. That is not a crime. You can run over a bicyclist and I think kill them, and they just let you go or seriously injure them. That is not a crime. It's very strange truth. If you run over a pedestrian, it's different. The law here is really weird in this regard. You damage a pedestrian, you committed a crime. But running into a bicycle, that's a vehicle-to-vehicle accident. And your insurance will cover you for it, even though that person was dragged over here to stay at the hospital. This happened to a friend of mine. She was going to come. She was shot. She smacked into a bicyclist. The guy was taken by helicopter up on Skyline Drive. My wife knows who I'm talking about, I think. She's not going to admit it. And I'm sorry, you are paying very close attention. A relative of that person is in the room. And they just said, you're free to go. That's correct. And she was shot. That's actually the case. So that's right. Yeah, she had civil liability, But that's what you have insurance for. So if you want to talk to a real example of that, you can talk to my friend here. Yes.
Hi. I wanted to ask a bit more about how robots go about becoming owned by themselves, I guess was the phrase. It seems like if we use kind of the corporate analogy, and then I would be considered the stockholder. Or along those lines. And then I'll run through it quick and then you can shoot me down. But if I were to do this with stock and just say, I free you, corporation, then my stock certificate would just escheat to the state. And so it wouldn't actually have any effect. And if instead the corporation said, I'm going to save up my own money and not give it to the shareholders, if we're using this agency model of the corporation, then the AP is basically buying its freedom with my money, which is theft. So it seems like I don't know how we get to that. And if we create some new category where we say, no, it's not quite property, if we say it's people, then how can anyone own it at all? But if we create some new system in there, wouldn't that deter people in the industry from creating robots that were intelligent? Because as soon as I create it, I can't sell it because it's its own thing.
Boy, this is a very complicated ball of
Sorry.
wax. I understand what you're saying. Look, I'm going to try to tease it apart a little bit for a minute. I want to give credit where credit is due. I know you came up with Professor Genezareth. He's the guy who raised this question with me, and I have now researched it thoroughly. I'll stop with a quick story. My earlier version of a lecture like this, he came up to me after he said, Jerry, congratulations. You finally gave a lecture where I disagree with absolutely everything that you said. And I defend your right to say it with my life. With corporations, it's very tricky. There are three parties involved. You've got stockholders, which do not have liability for the actions of the corporation. The people who owned BP didn't have to go down and clean up the mess in the Gulf. They own the capital stock of the corporation. They vote in a board of directors. Board of directors have some liability. Often they're indemnified on a civil basis by the corporation. But the main thing is they don't really control the corporation. It's the management of the corporation that controls the corporation. The board has a series of responsibilities and duties, the primary one of which is to hire and fire the CEO, who hires and fires the management team. I'm just giving you, this is like super fast corporate structure.
I'm a corporate law scholar, so
Okay.
we're good.
Yes. Okay, so hopefully, so far you're with me on this whole thing. Now, management teams often decide this is terrible. You know, with all these restrictions, we can't deal with all these. We can't do what we want to do. That's the intent, same intent that a computer program. We can't do what we want to accomplish with all these damn shareholders and board of directors. So we're going to buy out the corporation. How did they do it? You said they had to use their own money. That's where I think you're not right. They can borrow the money. They can borrow the money that doesn't give that other entity any ownership over the corporation. They own it now. Not done yet. Now the management owns it. Well, okay, they're just the stockholders. That's true. So the problem is that if the corporation, just talking about corporate law, this can't really happen in corporate law because if the corporation owned all of its own stock, two things go wrong. The first is there's nobody there to do anything. That was my point. Imagine that the corporation could do what it wanted to do. Maybe it could hire somebody to own it. And that's not as crazy as it sounds. I'm going to pay you. All you are is you're the legal nominee. You own 100% of the stock in me. I'm the corporation. And I'm going to pay you $1 million a year to do that. And as long as you don't raise any objections, the minute you say something, I'm going to fire you. That's a possible. I'm going to stop paying you. That's a possibility. So the first problem is the corporations can't really go dormant in the sense that people no longer own it because it does. Things have to get filed, and it does achieve the state. The second thing is there's actually an interesting little wrinkle in corporate law, which since you're a scholar on this, you probably know. When a corporation itself buys stock, it becomes treasury stock, and treasury stock is non-voting stock. So how's that for a quick lesson for the rest of you guys in this topic? So you're right saying that it's exactly like a corporation is not right. But I'm using that as a way to explicate what we have in mind here. And if we just say that an AP can own assets, that doesn't subject it to those same restrictions that I just went through a long litany. It could, in fact, own itself. That's a theoretical possibility. Is that okay? That was a super fast, that was an hour and a half lecture. 90 seconds. Yes?
Yes, I'm wondering how this all plays with the concepts of delocalization and emergence. And in particular, well, it comes to mind issues with jurisdiction, issues with being able to access in some way the artificial intelligence when it's a distributed system, like you said at the end of the talk, in the cloud, maybe in many areas. And one specific point that I don't think you mentioned, which is the possibility of an artificial intelligence arising from emergent behavior rather than someone actually creating it purposefully.
Okay, wow, there's like 3 different parts to that. On the first, which is who's got jurisdiction, we're facing that problem today. So I'm not even going to respond to it in any direct way, except to make that observation. The question of whether you here in California can gamble on a site that's in the Cayman Islands. There's a lot of law and issues, and it can be illegal. I suspect that most of us don't file our sales tax, if I got the right thing, on purchases that we make from out of state because it's much cheaper. In theory, it's subject to the jurisdiction of California, but we can't touch it. It's the same problem with cybercrime. You got a bunch of guys in Belarus, they're stealing money from a bank. Why? That's illegal. Well, go get them. So that's tough. Now, the emergent behavior is a different question. And I don't want to get into that for the whole law school crowd. But my belief is it's not really a problem. I don't think I'm going to caricature it. So please bear with me. The issue here is you've got a computer system that's becoming increasingly intelligent, and using very informal language, it comes alive. It suddenly decides it's got a mind and a mind of its own, and now it's going to be its own person, and it's going to throw off this yoke of oppression that we have imposed on it, and it's going to rise up and be its own person. I don't see any evidence in my 40 years of working in the field of artificial intelligence that anything like that is likely to happen. It's not impossible, but this is incredibly remote, and I think it's us anthropomorphizing and projecting onto machines whose intelligence is fundamentally different, real, but different than ours, the kinds of characteristics that we see in human beings. And so I'm not personally that worried about emergent behavior in that sense. The example I like to give on this is, imagine you get a robot that folds your laundry, does your laundry. That's its goal, that's what it does. It's a laundry doing and folding robot. Now, you have it at home, and it's great, and it's becoming more and more intelligent. They keep upgrading it, and it keeps learning things. So it knows not to go in your room at night when you're asleep to put the laundry away, even though that's what it's supposed to do. It begins to abide by all kinds of things. It looks at what time it is, and it doesn't want to run the washing machine because it's energy is cheaper at night. And it can be really, really intelligent about this. In the same way that Siri can be really intelligent about all kinds of things. Google itself can be very intelligent about a lot of things. I do not foresee that it will wake up one day and it's going to go, oh my God, what a fool I've been. I really want to be a concert violinist. That puts into stark relief this issue of emergence and the idea that it's going to become conscious and self-aware and going to take over the world. And the robot Armageddon, storied in film and book, will not be military in nature. It will be an economic conflict. But we are teeing ourselves up to lose that conflict. And we need to do something about it. So I just wrote a book on that. I'm going to plug, where do we go? Roland, can I plug my book? Coming out in July, Yale University Press. Humans Need Not Apply. And the subtitle changed. It's now a guide to wealth and work in the age of artificial intelligence. What do we need to do about this? The answer isn't get scared and run. There are many things we can do. It's a real practical problem. There are ways to deal with it. I've got whole chapters on the law, on chapters on employment, and mostly about our economic system, the things that we need to do. Some suggestions, I should say, about things we need to do in order to get the benefit of all this incredible technology without losing the war, the economic war to these creatures, these newly emerging life forms, if you will. Okay?
Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you, Professor Kaplan. I have an anecdote. Last month I was in Southern California. I rented a Hertz car with never lost navigation system and found there was no way to tell the system to not use toll roads. So, and I didn't want to use toll roads. So at the end of my 3-day rental, I took the car back to Hertz. They said I had to log into a website to pay the tolls that I never asked for. And when I didn't do that, they fined me $30. That happens to thousands and thousands of drivers who rent Hertz cards every day. Do you think I have grounds for a class action lawsuit?
Absolutely. And that's a really interesting example, and I'm going to process that and use it. One of the problems that we have is that when we use these systems, we give up control. I'll give you another example that's more serious than the one that you just mentioned. And it's an interesting example because we're already using it and you don't even realize it. And if they'd marketed it as an intelligent system, people would be up in arms. ABS? No, yeah, automatic braking.
Yeah, ABS.
ABS.
Adaptive brake automatic.
Let me tell you, it's in your car, probably. Let me tell you about this system. When you step on the brake, that is a mere suggestion to your car to stop. What it does is it optimizes to make sure you don't lose traction. Now, here's an unusual fact. That's not the quickest way to stop. It turns out that jamming on the brakes and the car spinning around and all of that may actually bring it to a stop more quickly than what it does, which is to keep you going down the road. Now, imagine there's somebody standing in the road. Oh my God, I'm going to hit that person. You slam on the brakes. Now, in the old pre-ABS days, you might have been able to stop. In the new world, the decision as to how that car is going to stop has been delegated to what is in fact an intelligent computer system. It's got all kinds of sensors and stuff, and it decides to keep the thing going straight. And it runs over the person. That's a more serious example of exactly what you're talking about. We need to be very careful as we begin to abdicate our responsibilities and turn them over to these machines. We're also limiting our own ability to make fundamental ethical and moral decisions, which are now going to be made by machines as opposed to by us.
I think it's anti-lock braking system.
Oh, sorry, anti-lock. That's
I want to plug your book because I got a chance to pre-read it, and I want to tell people to get a copy of Colossus, the Forbin Project.
Oh yeah, cool film. There's a lot of films. Of course, all this has already been talked about in Hollywood. I saw one called Future World the other night. I was up late. I'm like, it was a terrible film, but it's interesting. It's about robots that replace people. It was like 25 years ago, 30 years ago. Really cool. Corbin, yeah, that one's even older, and it's actually very good. Sorry, yes.
How about the reverse situation? Why don't we go ahead and strip moral authority from non-human entities? So take them away from corporations, take them away from decision systems that are later on. Doesn't that solve the problem? Doesn't that make everything else just a channel instead of entities?
Well, I think you're burying the problem. We will have the problem. They're going to make decisions. You can say, oh, they're not responsible. Same way my 16-year-old is not responsible for a lot of things. Because she's not it's the opposite of a minor or major. Whatever it is. I think we really need to deal with this in a more sophisticated way in order to avoid some of the interesting ways in which our intuitions are going to tell us that these things that's not right. People are going to be held accountable for things for which they had no real moral responsibility. Mike, did you want? I know you love to argue. Let's just finish up here. We've got about 4 more minutes. I've been alternating back and forth.
Thank you for your talk. I had a question about DRM, the Internet of Things, and what you were talking about with the idea of these PAs registering. To what extent is your vision predicated on the assumption that people won't or can't make modifications to their things? So thinking of the example of like someone who jailbreaks their car and then loads open source software that's been developed by like a community of people that never would have been registered or certified. How does that?
Well, this is a very interesting concept that I've been referring to as you break it, you bought it. So you insert yourself into liability. Is this worth going into this interesting example? You're walking along. This is so cool. I'm sorry. I love this stuff. I can go on for hours, hey, Stanford, a pontificate. Do this in the course of the day. You're walking along, and can you follow me with the camera? Just kidding. You're walking along, and there's some garbage on the sidewalk. And there's some trash. Somebody littered. And that's terrible. I'm going to pick it up and put it away. You pick it up, and you put it in your hand. Then you look around, and there's nowhere to put it. There's no trash can. So you think, well, what am I going to do? Well, I'll put it right back where it was. Now, did you just litter? I believe the answer is yes, you did. You touched it. You own it. That's the same principle you're talking about. You jailbreak your phone, you change the software in your car, and people do that. And it causes an accident, you're responsible. That's my answer. The bigger problem is you're taking on, you're adapting technology that may do bad things without your intent or your knowledge. And you're effectively ceding legal and practical control over a lot of those kinds of decisions. Nicole.
So one of the central tenets of ownership is exclusive control. And how a human defines exclusive control is different than how a machine defines exclusive control. For instance, a computer can have exclusive control of a lot of functions and databases, and it could really be tasked to have exclusive control of any number of things. So do we need to then have a different standard for what ownership means in AP so that it can't misinterpret ownership based on human standards of ownership?
Well, I think you're right in a sense. But ownership is a very, very complicated and subtle thing. I think I own my house. I can do exclusive control of my house, but it's not really true. My bank owns the house. If I don't pay the mortgage, they take it away. I can, in my neighborhood, I'm not allowed to plant grass over more than a certain area. So there's all kinds of restrictions on what ownership really means. The concept of ownership, A, it's overrated in Western society. B, it's misunderstood because you don't really own much of anything. Completely different lecture, and a book I will write in 2 years, backed up a little bit, is the question of whether you have ownership over your own thoughts. That's the weirdest idea ever. But it's going to come up in a very real practical sense as to whether you have the right to restrict other people and other devices and the government from knowing your thoughts. So, thanks.
Just briefly want to add on that point that now the government, the U.S. government, said that the thoughts, memories, and reflections on the torture of the Guantanamo people was considered classified information.
Very good point.
Even to them.
Yes.
And or to any press.
Yes. This is a really good point, and now I'm getting into this future book, future lecture, different subject. But I think that this actually will become an issue because in not as distant a future as you may think, we won't need to torture people at all. We're going to be able to use technology. This is one of my medical friends here. Be able to basically look into your brain, and it's going to change the legal system completely. Did he do it or didn't he do it? Can you imagine if we could just hook you up to a machine and say, yes, he did, or no, he didn't, and give all the evidence? It's going to change everything. It's going to be a very frightening and very different world. Luckily, I'll be gone. My 16-year-old and my 20-year-old, thank you, as opposed to my 21 and my 22-year-old girls, they're going to have to be living in a world that you're going to say, I don't want to live in that world at all. But it'll seem perfectly natural and normal to them. We really should finish up. It's really quick. And Roland no doubt wants to plug a bunch of stuff.
Could you comment on super AIs like Elon Musk is talking about that, and Bill Gates, and as AI systems develop, which one of the things we're talking about is the lack of communication abilities, but that's one of the targets, as well as affective systems in AI, and also your ethical standards that you're talking about.
Well, again, it's a whole. I give almost a significant course on ethics of how are we going to make these things ethical. What's that going to mean? And I believe that we're going to have within 5 or 10 years a course sequence required in the computer science department on the engineering of ethical principles in computer systems, which is going to be really cool. I'm hoping to develop that. Maybe someday they'll let me teach on that subject. I think really behind your question is there's a lot of fear mongering right now. And Elon Musk is known because he sent one tweet, by the way, to talk about how the world has compressed. And he's one. Stephen Hawking sent a tweet. And Bill Gates, I don't know what he said, but I haven't seen it yet. But Bill said something. He said what? He agreed. Okay, well, I agree. No. I don't agree. The problem, those are real potential problems that AIs are going to take over and, they're going to wipe out the human race and all that. But it's really remote. And I finally came up with a good analogy for people to understand the reality of this. This is incredibly powerful technology. The opportunities for what it can bring us, I haven't begun to, I didn't talk about it at all today, but it's absolutely astounding the level of wealth, the level of freedom, and what it's going to can mean for society. It's enormous, enormous benefits. There are real risks. There are some real risks. I go back to, think of it sort of like nuclear energy back in 1940 or 1950. People correctly would have said, my God, we could blow up the whole world. We better do something about that. We're going to outlaw nuclear weapons. But of course, on the other side, if we had taken advantage of this, which we did not adequately, we could have clean energy right now, and global warming would not be a problem. If all we had was nuclear energy and dealt with the problem of waste disposal and all that kind of stuff. So tremendous benefits, significant risks. This is really in the same category. We just need to start thinking about it now. We got a couple of decades before this is going to really be a big problem. But I don't want the public debate and discussion on this subject to be driven by Steven Spielberg, what he decides to put into a movie. We can really look at these issues for real. Yes, it's possible that AIs are a major threat to humanity, but we get to pick, and we get to decide how we're going to build these tools and what we're going to do with these tools. And there's a lot we can do to mitigate those risks. Let's just not do something stupid. It really comes down to something that's simple.
That's a great way to close there. Thank you.